My girlfriend fabricated false evidence of cheating. My parents kicked me out without listening because she was their million-dollar partner's daughter. But 5 years later, I discovered the truth and left them behind forever. I'm 28 years old. I live in Austin. I run my own tech consulting company. And 3 weeks ago, I got a call that basically confirmed what I'd already known for years: that my family is never going to apologize to me for what they did. The thing is, I need to tell this story because there are still people, you know, acquaintances from San Francisco who keep asking me why I don't talk to my parents. And the truth is, the explanation is long but necessary. I guess I should start at the beginning. When I was 23 and I was dating Camila, who at the time seemed like the perfect girl for me, or at least that's what everyone thought, including myself, if I'm being honest. My parents, Michael and Patricia, own a chain of luxury eco-friendly resorts on the West Coast, like those places where people pay like $800 a night to sleep in a sustainable cabin with ocean views. I grew up in San Francisco in a neighborhood where all my friends' parents were CEOs, startup founders, or investors, and where dinner conversations revolved around funding rounds and corporate mergers. My childhood was comfortable, I'm not going to lie, but it was also like living in a display window, where everything you did was evaluated by how it looked from the outside. My sister, Zoe, who's 2 years older than me, was always better than me at navigating that world. She knew exactly what to say and how to behave at those endless dinners where our parents mixed business with social life. My younger brother, Dylan, who was like 19 at the time, basically lived in his own bubble and didn't care about any of this, which honestly I always kind of envied. I met Camila at one of those networking parties my parents threw at our house. You know, the type of event where there are waiters with champagne trays and everyone talks about their next projects while pretending interest in others' conversations. She was the daughter of the Rodriguezes, a family that had investments in several of my parents' resorts, and from the moment we started talking, it was obvious our parents loved the idea of us being together. It was like we'd been programmed to end up as a couple, you know what I mean? The first few months were good, actually. We'd go out to expensive restaurants, go to events together, and she was smart and funny when we were alone. But looking back, I should have seen it coming. Because over time, the relationship became more of a performance than something real. Like a year and a half into dating, things started feeling weird. Camila became super obsessive about appearances, like she was constantly worried about how we looked in photos, what we posted on social media, what we said when we were with our friends. Every date felt like a photo shoot, and every conversation seemed designed so we could tell it later as an interesting anecdote at some dinner. I tried to talk to her about this. I'd say, hey, I feel like we're not ourselves anymore. But she always deflected or made me feel like I was overreacting. Like, she'd say things like, oh, Nathan, I just want us to have good memories. Or, Nathan, you don't understand the importance of maintaining our image. And I'd be left there thinking, are we seriously talking about our image like we're a corporate brand? The truth is, by the time we hit 2 years together, I was already considering ending the relationship. Not because there was someone else or anything like that, but simply because I felt exhausted from pretending everything was perfect when it clearly wasn't. But I never got to have that conversation because Camila beat me to it in the most twisted way you can imagine. One Saturday morning, I think it was like February or March 2020, right before everyone locked down for the pandemic, I got a call from my sister, Zoe. Her voice sounded weird, like between angry and disappointed, and she said, Nathan, I need you to come home now. Mom and Dad want to talk to you. I asked what was going on, but she just repeated, just come. It's important. I got to my parents' house like an hour later, and when I walked in, I found my whole family sitting in the living room. My parents, Zoe, even Dylan was there, even though he normally avoided this type of family drama. And there, sitting next to my mom on the couch, was Camila with red eyes like she'd been crying for hours. My first thought was that something bad had happened to her, like someone had died or something, but then my father looked at me with an expression I'd never seen on him before, a mix of disappointment and disgust that basically froze me in place. He said, sit down, Nathan. And I sat on the armchair facing them, not understanding absolutely anything about what was happening. Camila started talking through sobs, saying something about how she'd trusted me and how I'd betrayed her, and I looked at her completely confused, thinking, what the hell is she talking about? Then Zoe pulled out her phone and showed me some screenshots of supposed conversations between me and another girl. Super explicit messages where I was apparently planning to meet up with her and telling her things I'd never in my life said to anyone. The phone number was mine, or at least the last 4 digits matched my number, and the messages included details that theoretically only I would know, like the name of my first dog or the place where I went to my first concert. I sat there looking at those screenshots, and all I could say was, "This isn't me. I didn't write this. Someone's making all this up." But the more I said it, the more furious my father got. He told me to stop lying, that it was pathetic. I couldn't even admit what I'd done, that he was disappointed his son turned out to be such a coward. My mom just cried silently while hugging Camila, and Zoe looked at me like I was the worst person in the world. I tried to explain to them that it was physically impossible for me to have sent those messages because the dates and times shown in the screenshots coincided with moments when I was in work meetings or with them themselves, but no one was listening. Dylan tried to say something like, "Dad, maybe we should look into this better," but my father practically yelled at him to shut up. The family meeting, if you can call it that, lasted like 2 hours that felt like 2 years. Camila kept crying and saying things like, "I thought you were different, and how could you do this to me?" And my parents basically gave all their compassion to her while treating me like I was a stranger. At some point, my father said something I'll never forget. He said, "Nathan, Camila's family are our most important partners. We have joint investments worth millions of dollars, and you've put all that at risk with your irresponsible behavior." And that's when I understood everything, you know? They didn't care about the truth. They didn't care about hearing my side. All they cared about was maintaining their business relationship with the Rodriguezes. I got up from the chair and tell them that if they weren't going to believe me, then there was no point in staying there. And my father responded that if I walked out that door, I shouldn't come back. I thought he was exaggerating, like it was one of those dramatic phrases parents say when they're angry but don't really mean, so I took my keys and left. I went back to my apartment, which at the time was a loft in the financial district that my parents helped me pay for, and I spent the whole night trying to understand what had just happened. I checked my phone 1,000 times looking for some explanation, called some friends to ask if they'd noticed anything weird, but nobody knew anything. The next day I got an email from my father. Not a call or a text message, a formal email like it was corporate communication. It said they'd decided to cut all financial support immediately, that my name would be removed from any shared bank accounts, and that I wasn't welcome at any family property until I admitted what I'd done, and apologized appropriately to Camila and her family. It also mentioned that he hoped I understood these actions were necessary to protect the family's interests and maintain the important relationships they'd built over years. I read it like 3 times, unable to believe my own father was writing to me as if I were a problematic employee. They were firing. The next few days were a nightmare. My parents actually kept their word and cut me off completely. The credit card I had stopped working, my access to the family bank account was revoked, and when I went to talk to the owner of my apartment, he told me my parents had canceled the lease. I called Zoe like 5 times, but she didn't answer, and Dylan sent me a message saying, "Sorry, bro, but Mom and Dad won't let me talk to you." I tried to contact some family friends, people who'd known me since I was a kid, but they all basically avoided me. I guess because they didn't want to get in trouble with my parents, or because I believed I was guilty. The most twisted thing about all this is that Camila started posting stuff on social media about overcoming betrayals and finding strength in difficult moments, and our whole friend community in San Francisco was liking it and commenting supportive things. I, on the other hand, became the villain of the story, the guy who cheated on his perfect girlfriend, and every time I tried to explain my version of events, people thought I was making up excuses. It was like living in a psychological horror movie where everyone believes a lie except you, and no matter how much you scream the truth because nobody's going to listen to you. I spent like 2 weeks, basically in shock, sleeping on the couch of a college friend who lived in Oakland and trying to figure out what I was going to do with my life. I had some savings from my job. I worked at a tech startup doing corporate sales, but it definitely wasn't enough to maintain the lifestyle I was used to. The hardest part wasn't so much the financial situation, though obviously that was also complicated, but the feeling that the people who were supposed to believe me unconditionally, my own family, had decided that a convenient lie was more valuable than the truth. I think it was like the third week after the disaster that I made the decision to leave San Francisco completely. I couldn't keep living in a city where every corner reminded me of my family, where every restaurant or coffee shop had the possibility of running into someone from my parents' social circle, where I basically felt like a pariah. A friend of mine from the startup told me Austin was looking for people in tech sales, that the cost of living was much lower than San Francisco, and that I could basically start from scratch without anyone knowing my story. I applied to like 10 different positions, got an offer at an enterprise software company where the salary was decent but nothing compared to what I could have had if I'd stayed in the Bay Area. And I packed everything I had in my 2017 Honda Civic and literally drove for 2 days to Texas. The first few months in Austin were weird. I'd gone from living in a loft in San Francisco with a view of the Bay Bridge to sharing a 2-bedroom apartment with a roommate in East Austin who was basically a stranger. My job was demanding. But honestly, I was grateful to have something to focus on because the alternative was staying there, thinking about everything that had happened and probably falling into depression. I started going to the gym almost obsessively, I think because it was the only thing I felt I had complete control over at that moment. And little by little, I started building a new routine that had nothing to do with my previous life. The interesting thing, I don't know if interesting is the right word, but what happened is that the more time I spent away from San Francisco, the more I realized how toxic that life had been. Constantly worrying about appearances, having to attend events where you didn't really know anyone deeply, living under this pressure to maintain a certain image, all of that was exhausting, and I hadn't even noticed it until I wasn't there anymore. In Austin, I met people who worked in tech, but also had normal hobbies, who went out to bars without worrying about being photographed, who valued authenticity over strategic networking, and that was like a breath of fresh air. About a year into being in Austin, I got a better position at another software company, this time as senior sales manager, and with that salary increase, I was able to move into my own apartment in the south of the city. I started going out more, made friends who knew nothing about my past in San Francisco, and basically allowed myself to just be Nathan without all the complicated family history behind me. It was around that time that I met Mia at a networking event for graphic designers and tech people, where she was presenting her freelance work portfolio. We talked for hours that day about everything except work, like about music and travel and our favorite restaurants in Austin, and when I went home that night I thought, this is what a real connection with someone is supposed to feel like. Mia and I started dating like a month after meeting, and what I liked from the beginning is that she didn't come from money. She didn't care about appearances in the superficial sense. And she was basically real in everything she did. I told her about my family and the whole situation with Camila after like 3 months of being together, and her reaction was very different from what I expected. It wasn't pity or disbelief. She just listened to me and said, "That sounds horrible, Nathan, but I'm glad you were able to get out of there and build something better." She didn't try to fix the situation or give me unsolicited advice. She just supported me, and that meant more to me than she probably realizes. By the second year in Austin, things were going really well. I'd started my own tech consulting company working with small and medium-sized startups, helping them with sales strategies and customer development, and honestly, it took off faster than I expected. Mia and I moved in together to a townhouse in downtown Austin. We adopted a dog named Bruno, who was half Labrador, half something else, and I was basically living the life I always wanted but never knew I wanted, if that makes sense. I didn't talk to my family at all. I'd blocked my parents on all platforms, and only had occasional contact with Dylan through very sporadic emails, where he'd tell me superficial things about his life, but never mentioned the rest of the family. Then came the call from Zoe. And when I say this call changed everything, I'm not exaggerating. It was like 3.5 years after I'd left San Francisco. I was already 27 at that point, and I'd honestly made peace with the fact that my family was never going to admit they were wrong. Zoe called me on a Tuesday afternoon while I was working from home, and her voice sounded different, like nervous but also urgent. She said, "Nathan, I need to tell you something important. Can you talk?" And I said yes, even though honestly I considered not answering because we'd literally gone years without talking. What Zoe told me was that Jessica, one of Camila's best friends, had contacted her a few weeks earlier after she and Camila had a terrible fight about something completely unrelated. Apparently, Jessica was so angry that she decided to reveal something she'd been keeping for years, that Camila had fabricated all the messages using a combination of Photoshop and a burner phone, that she'd researched details about my life to make the messages seem authentic, and that the whole plan had basically been to manipulate and control me because she felt I was pulling away emotionally. Jessica had told Zoe that she'd always known it was a lie, but had kept the secret because she was her friend, but that, after the fight, she didn't owe anyone loyalty anymore and wanted the truth to come out. Zoe told me all this, and then stayed silent, waiting for my reaction, and honestly, I didn't know what to say for several seconds. On one hand, I felt this massive validation, like finally someone admitting I'd been right all this time, but on the other hand, I felt a rage I hadn't felt in years. I asked Zoe if she'd told our parents, and she said yes, that as soon as Jessica confessed everything, she went directly to talk to them. I asked what our parents said, and her answer was what basically confirmed everything I already suspected about them. She told me our father had said something like, "Well, it already happened anyway, there's no point in reliving the past," and that our mother had just cried a little, but hadn't suggested contacting me or apologizing. Zoe started saying things like, "Nathan, I'm so sorry I believed you. I should have investigated more. I should have listened to you," and I let her talk, but the truth is, her apologies felt like too little too late, you know? She'd had 3.5 years to doubt Camila's story, 3.5 years to wonder if maybe her brother was telling the truth, but instead, she'd chosen the easy path of believing what everyone else believed. I told her I appreciated her telling me the truth, but that I needed time to process everything, and she asked if we could talk again soon, that she'd like to start rebuilding our relationship. I told her I'd think about it and hung up. Like 2 weeks passed after that call, and I got absolutely nothing from my parents. Not a text message, not an email, not a call, nothing. And that tells you everything you need to know about the type of people they are, that even after discovering they'd disowned their own son based on fabricated lies, they couldn't swallow their pride enough to admit they'd been wrong. Zoe sent me a few more messages telling me she'd confronted Camila, who apparently denied everything at first, but eventually admitted what she'd done when Zoe showed her Jessica's messages. Apparently, Camila had even tried to justify it, saying things like, "Nathan was pulling away from me, and I didn't know what else to do." As if fabricating false evidence of infidelity was a reasonable response to relationship problems, life went on as usual in Austin. My business was growing. Mia and I were planning to buy a house, and I was basically at the best point in my life professionally and personally. But something about knowing the truth, having it officially confirmed, changed something in me. It wasn't just that I knew I was innocent, which I'd always known, but now everyone knew it, and my parents simply chose not to do anything about it. That somehow felt worse than the original accusation, because at least then I could tell myself that maybe someday they'd discover the truth and come apologize, but now I knew they were never going to do that. About 6 months after Zoe's call, she contacted me again to tell me Dylan was getting married in a few months and wanted me at the wedding. She sent me the formal invitation by mail to my address in Austin, which I don't know how she got, but apparently Zoe had given him my details. The invitation was super elegant, like the kind that probably cost like $15 a piece, and there was a handwritten note from Dylan that said something like, "Nathan, I know a lot has happened, but you're my brother, and it would mean a lot to me if you were there on my special day." The wedding was in San Francisco, obviously, at some luxury venue in Nob Hill, and just seeing the invitation, I felt this mix of emotions that was hard to describe. Mia asked me if I was going to go, and I told her I honestly didn't know. On one hand, it was my younger brother's wedding, someone who technically hadn't done anything wrong except not defend me when he should have, and part of me felt guilty for considering not going. But on the other hand, I knew that, if I went, I'd have to see my parents. I'd have to be in the same space as them. I'd probably have to hear them introduce me to other guests, as if everything was fine between us. And the idea of that made me feel physically sick. Mia told me she'd support whatever decision I made, but to think carefully about whether it was worth giving my family access to my life again after everything that had happened. I decided to take some time to think about it, like not respond immediately, but also not rule out the idea completely. But then the messages started. First, it was Zoe telling me it would be important for the whole family for me to go, that Dylan really wanted me there, and it would be an opportunity to start healing as a family. Then Dylan himself wrote me a long email talking about how he missed me and how he wanted me to meet his fiancée. And finally, like 3 weeks before the wedding, I got a message from my mother, the first in almost 4 years, saying, "Nathan, please consider attending your brother's wedding. It would be the right thing for the family." That message from my mother was what basically sealed my decision. It wasn't an apology. It wasn't an acknowledgement of what they'd done to me. It was just a request that I do the right thing for the family. As if I was the one who'd broken the family. As if I was the one who needed to take the first step to fix things. I responded with a very short message that said, "I've thought about your invitation, and I've decided not to attend. I wish Dylan and his future wife the best," and that was it. I didn't give explanations. I didn't go into details. I just said no. The next few days, my phone exploded with messages. Zoe wrote me saying she was disappointed in me, that after everything that had happened, I was the one choosing to maintain the family division. Dylan sent me a more emotional message, saying he didn't understand how I could miss his wedding, that he'd always supported me, that this wasn't fair to him. And my father, in his typical style, sent me a formal email saying my decision was selfish and immature, that I was prioritizing my own resentment over family well-being, and that he hoped I'd reconsider my position. My mother didn't write again after my first rejection. The part that bothered me most was Dylan's message, because he really seemed to believe I was missing his wedding just to hurt him specifically, without understanding this had nothing to do with him. I tried to explain it to him in a response. I told him I loved him and was happy he was getting married, but that I couldn't be at an event where I'd have to pretend everything was fine with our parents, when it clearly wasn't. I told him they never apologized, never acknowledged what they did to me, and that I didn't owe them more than they'd given me. His response was basically that I was being dramatic and needed to get over the past. Mia was incredible through all this. She never pressured me to go, never suggested. Maybe I was being too hard on my family. She just supported me in my decision and reminded me that I didn't owe anything to people who treated me so badly. The day of Dylan's wedding, which I think was like last November, Mia and I went to a new restaurant in Austin we'd wanted to try, saw a movie, and basically had a normal day. I didn't feel guilt or regret, just this sense of peace with my decision. After the wedding, Zoe tried to contact me a couple more times, but eventually stopped when it became clear I wasn't going to change my mind. Dylan sent me photos of the wedding a few weeks later with a message that said something like, "Look what you missed," but I just looked at them briefly and didn't respond. And my parents, well, they returned to their usual silence, probably telling everyone in San Francisco some version of the story where I was the problematic son who refused to be part of the family. What did happen is that, like, a month after the wedding, I got an email from my father with the subject line, "Business Opportunity." I thought it was spam at first, but when I opened it, it was literally a proposal for me to join one of his resort projects, and that there was a director of operations position available, and he thought I'd be perfect for the role. The email was written in a completely professional way, as if he were contacting an external candidate, and didn't mention absolutely anything about our family history or the fact that we hadn't talked in years except to fight about Dylan's wedding. It was obvious this was his way of trying to reintroduce himself into my life, but doing it through business because that was the only thing he knew how to do. I didn't respond to that email. Instead, I blocked his email address, blocked my mother's number, and basically closed all possible communication channels except the ones I had with Dylan, which I kept open only because technically he hadn't been directly part of the original problem. Mia asked me if I felt bad about cutting off contact so definitively, and I told her no, that I actually felt liberated. For the first time in years, I didn't have this little voice in the back of my head asking me if maybe I should try to fix things with my family, because now it was completely clear there was nothing to fix. Like 3 months ago, Mia and I got engaged. It was super casual. We were walking Bruno in a park near our house on a Saturday afternoon, and we basically arrived at the same time at the conclusion that we wanted to spend the rest of our lives together. There wasn't even a formal proposal with a ring and the whole thing, just an honest conversation about what we wanted and where we saw ourselves in the future. We decided that when we get married, it's going to be something small, just close friends and the people who really matter to us, and we're definitely not going to invite my family from San Francisco. Last week, just when I was working on a proposal for a new client, I got a message from Dylan. I hadn't talked to him in months, since I stopped responding to his messages about the wedding, But this message was different. He was telling me our parents had asked about me, that they wanted to know how I was and what I was doing, and that he'd mentioned that according to my social media, it seemed I was doing well. What bothered me wasn't so much the message itself, but the implication that somehow I was the one who needed to report my life to them through third parties, as if they had any right to that information after everything that happened. I responded to Dylan, telling him I appreciated him caring about me, but that he needed to understand I don't have a relationship with our parents, and I'm not going to have one in the foreseeable future. And that wasn't negotiable. I told him I love him as a brother, but he can't be the intermediary between them and me because there's simply nothing to communicate. His response was brief. He just said he understood, and I respected my decision. Though honestly, I don't know if he really understands or if he's just saying what he thinks I need to hear. My company is going incredibly well. We just closed a contract with a startup in San Antonio that's going to double my income this year, and Mia just landed a huge project with a branding agency in Houston. We're looking at bigger houses because we want to have space to eventually have kids, and we're basically building exactly the life we want without any influence or intervention from my family of origin. I'm not going to lie and say I never think about them, or that there aren't moments when I wonder what things would be like if they'd reacted differently. But those thoughts are less and less frequent and less painful. Sometimes new friends ask me about my family, and I simply say we're not in contact, and if they ask why, I give them a super summarized version of the story. Most people respond with something like, "Wow, that's terrible, I'm so sorry," and then change the subject, which I appreciate. I don't need people to feel sorry for me or try to convince me I should forgive my family because family is important. The reality is that biological family is only important if they choose to treat you with the respect and love you deserve, and when they don't, you have every right to create your own family with the people who do value you. And what I've learned from all this, and it sounds cliché, but it's true, is that sometimes the best decision you can make is to walk away from toxic people even if they share your blood. My parents made their decision when they decided their business interests were more important than their son, and I made my decision when I decided my peace of mind and my future were more important than maintaining a superficial relationship with people who never supported me when I needed it most. I don't regret leaving San Francisco. I don't regret not going to Dylan's wedding. And I definitely don't regret blocking my parents because at the end of the day, they had multiple opportunities to do the right thing, and they chose not to. Now I'm 28 years old. I run my own successful company. I'm engaged to someone who loves me unconditionally and supports me in everything, and I live in a city that feels like my real home. My family isn't in San Francisco with people who share my last name. It's here in Austin with Mia and Bruno and the friends I've made who've become my real support circle. And that's enough for me. More than enough, actually. I don't need validation or forgiveness from my parents because I finally understood they're never going to give me either of those things, and it's okay because I don't need them anymore.